The impeachment trial of President Trump is now in the Senate's hands. Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts assumed the role of presiding officer before swearing in senators.
Will you place your left hand on the Bible and raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear that in all things appertaining to the trial of the impeachment of Donald John Trump, President of the United States, now pending, you will do impartial justice according to the Constitution and the laws, so help you God?
I do.
God bless you.
Thank you very much. At this time, I will administer the oath to all senators in the chamber in conformance with Article 1, Section 3, Clause 6 of the Constitution and the Senate's impeachment rules. Will all senators now stand or remain standing and raise their right hand? Do you solemnly swear that in all things appertaining to the trial of the impeachment of Donald John Trump, President of the United States, now pending, you will do impartial justice according to the Constitution and laws, so help you God?
25 groups of 4 senators each then proceeded to the front of the chamber to sign an oath book. This all comes after the Senate formally accepted the articles of impeachment from the House this morning. As a reminder, the charges levied by the House are abuse of power in the Trump administration's dealings with Ukraine and obstruction of Congress. Earlier today, the 7 impeachment managers walked through Capitol Hill to hand-deliver the articles. House Intelligence Committee Chair Adam Schiff is the lead impeachment manager. He read the articles before the Senate this afternoon.
President Trump, by such conduct, has demonstrated that he will remain a threat to the Constitution if allowed to remain in office, and has acted in a manner grossly incompatible with self-governance and the rule of law. President Trump thus warrants impeachment and trial, removal from office, and disqualification to hold and enjoy any office of honor, trust, or profit under the United States.
Let's bring in Ben Tracy and Rebecca Kaplan. Ben is a CBS News White House correspondent. Rebecca is a CBS News Capitol Hill producer. Welcome to both of you. Rebecca, let me start with you. What more did we learn from the documents released by Parnas?
Well, these documents really show the extent of Mr. Parnas's work in Ukraine, not only his communication with the president's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, but also a lot of communication with senior aides to Ukrainian President Zelensky. So it backs up this story that he's saying that he was very involved in the process of trying to get Ukraine to announce investigations into former Vice President Joe Biden, the president's potential political rival, and his son, Hunter Biden. And it backs up that message that we just heard him relay from last night on MSNBC, saying the president knew exactly what was going on. He said he may not have been in personal contact with the president himself, but he had no doubt that Giuliani was relaying his work to the president, and it was done with his approval. So these handwritten notes, texts, voicemails do help to back up his story. But obviously, there are still a lot of questions raised because all of this evidence only came out after Mr. Parnas was arrested and then charged with violating campaign finance laws.
So, Ben, has the White House responded to this new evidence? Is it at all concerned in particular about the allegations regarding Yovanovitch? And shouldn't the State Department also be concerned if it is true that an ambassador was being surveyed like that?
Yeah, the answer to that last question is yes. But the White House and the State Department have been very silent about these issues, especially surrounding Marie Yovanovitch. You would expect the State Department to come out and say they want to get to the bottom of that, to find out if one of their ambassadors, who is still on the payroll of the State Department, was being surveilled in this manner. As for Lev Parnas, the White House has responded about his allegations and basically is attacking his credibility, saying that this is somebody who is under a federal indictment, he can't be trusted, that he has motives in terms of trying to cut a deal to get a better deal with federal prosecutors. So they're going after a credibility issue, but we should keep in mind that Lev Parnas wasn't just some guy out there doing these things. He was working for Rudy Giuliani, who was representing the president there. And we did push Kellyanne Conway, one of the president's advisors, this morning, saying, doesn't this reflect badly on Giuliani's judgment at the least if he enlists someone like this? And she really kind of blew that off and said, you know, you guys are trying to make Lev Parnas the celebrity of the day as a way to attack the president.
So, Rebecca, our Nancy Cordes asked House Speaker Nancy Pelosi about the Parnas documents, specifically about the pressure this could put on Republicans. Let's listen to the response.
Madam Speaker, what's your response to Senate Republicans who say they shouldn't have to consider new evidence like the Parnas material because it wasn't included in the House investigation?
No, they're afraid of the truth. The American people have seen the allegations, and they're allegations. We need to see more evidence that would be contained in the documentation. This is just another avoiding of the facts and the truth on their part. They don't want to see documents. They don't want to hear from eyewitnesses. They want to ignore anything new that comes up.
So, Rebecca, could these new documents impact whether Senate Republicans will call for witnesses or new documents in the Senate trial? It does increase the pressure on Senate Republicans just a little, doesn't it?
It certainly does, and that's the point Speaker Pelosi was making when she spoke here in this room just a few hours ago. The problem is that so far this is being greeted with a lot less fanfare than, say, the offer by the president's former national security advisor, John Bolton, who said just before the new year that if subpoenaed, he would testify in a Senate trial. And that's something that he indicated he would fight in court if the House tried to do the same. But so far, Parnas is making a lot less waves up here. Certainly Democrats are trying to apply further pressure and say, look, this is yet another reason that we need witnesses, we need documents. But for Senate Republicans, they're going back and saying the House had its chance to talk to Parnas, and it shouldn't be our job to complete the investigation that they failed to finish. Now, obviously, this is a little tricky because Parnas was arrested partway through the House investigation, and it seems like it took a while for him to regain access to some of these materials that he wanted to share with the House Intelligence Committee. That is why we saw these documents being added to the impeachment evidence literally last night as the articles were being prepared to make their way over to the Senate. But as long as Republicans are wholesale resisting calls for witnesses and documents, in their eyes, Lev Parnas is no different from the rest.
And Ben, Speaker Pelosi says the American people want to see a fair trial and they want to see the new evidence in the Senate. But a recent PBS NewsHour poll shows, based on what we now know, Americans are still divided on whether the Senate should remove the president. So, Ben, does the White House feel the president is gaining in the court of public opinion?
Yeah, the White House has been encouraged all along that the public opinion on impeachment really hasn't changed that much. I mean, there have been times where it's gone up or down by a couple of points, but the opinions on this have largely been baked in for a long time right now. If you're a Democrat, you generally supported impeachment and generally support removal. If you're a Republican, you don't. And the White House is much more focused on a smaller group of people, the president's base, and they feel like this has only emboldened them. They feel like this has made his base stronger. And when you talk to the campaign and you go to these campaign rallies, anecdotally, that does seem to be true. This has become a rallying point for people who support the president. And he has turned it around, saying that this isn't just the Democrats coming after him and trying to remove him from office. It's the Democrats trying to take away their vote. And that seems to be a pretty good argument for the president when he's out on the campaign stump.
And Ben, we mentioned the Government Accountability Office's statement on Ukraine aid. This is this is not a political group. So how is the White House responding to this?
Well, the White House is basically saying that aid to Ukraine was eventually released, and therefore there's no harm, no foul here. Publicly, the Office of Management and Budget, which is the executive branch office that actually withheld that aid, they're saying that the aid was withheld to make sure that the taxpayers' money was spent properly and in accordance with the president's policies. The only problem with that is basically what the GAO is saying is it's not up to the president to decide. It's not about his policies. Congress decides when and how money is spent, and they allocated this money to go to Ukraine, so it's not the president's role to withhold that, and they say that's how the law was violated. Behind the scenes, I can tell you that senior administration officials here at the White House say the GAO is overreaching here, and they're accusing the GAO of inserting itself into this impeachment process. But we should keep in mind that this was a report commissioned by Congress. This isn't just something they went and did on their own.
And Rebecca, the speaker started her press conference with that GAO report. Clearly, Democrats view it as important. But does this office really have any authority at all over the White House?
as an independent government agency, their choice here would be to sue the White House to try to force the release of this aid. But obviously, as Ben mentioned, the aid has been released at this point, so it really becomes moot. And that is what we've seen in previous cases where the GAO criticized a decision to withhold spending of a particular variety. If it was ultimately released later, there's not really much case for a lawsuit anymore. So this really becomes, I think, more of a great political talking point for Democrats in pointing to their entire theory of the impeachment case as we move into the Senate trial phase, but less something that's actually going to change the reality on the ground right now for Ukraine or for security aid.
And speaking of that Senate trial, as it begins, Ben, remind our viewers of how the White House has been preparing.
So you have the White House counsel, Pat Cipollone, and the president's personal attorney, Jay Sekulow. Those are going to be the two kind of faces of the impeachment defense. So they are getting ready for this trial to begin as early as next Tuesday. The president has been tweeting, you know, the president's position on this has evolved. He at first said he wanted this full defense with lots of witnesses. He seems to have evolved more to a position of, I'd rather this get dismissed very quickly. But I can tell you that the legal team here doesn't expect that to happen. They just don't think a vote to dismiss at the very top of this procedure is going to happen. So they're preparing for a full-on trial. They're also preparing for a witness portion of this trial because they feel there are enough Republicans that will go along with Democrats to call at least a limited number of witnesses.
And so, Rebecca, who are the senators in both parties we should keep a particular eye on as the trial starts?
Well, this is a very interesting setting where senators actually have to sit quietly, and they may not even be able to ask questions. They're submitted through the Chief Justice, so they're going to be very quiet. It's not like the usual congressional hearings we see up here on Capitol Hill. Now, Democrats, we know, really broadly have a lot of issues with how Trump handled Ukraine, the security aid, with seeking these investigations. So we can really anticipate what position they're going to take when it comes to this trial. We're going to be more focused on these this narrow slice of Republicans in the conference over there who have sometimes been willing to go against the president and who have expressed an openness to hearing more evidence, more witnesses, more documents. Mitt Romney of Utah, Susan Collins of Maine, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, Lamar Alexander of Tennessee, who's retiring. Those are all people we'll be keeping an eye on to see if they decide to join with Democrats and vote in favor of allowing more witnesses and documents in this trial. And now one other interesting dynamic to keep an eye on here, while obviously Democrats do want to see the president removed from office, you do have 3 Democratic senators, Bernie Sanders of Vermont, Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota, and of course Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts, who are going to be kept off the presidential campaign trail by this trial. All those days they're going to be sitting in the Senate are days that they are not connecting with voters in Iowa. So do they get antsy as we get closer and closer to the caucuses? We'll have to wait and see.
All right, Rebecca Kaplan and Ben Tracy in Washington, thanks to both of you.
You're welcome.